Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to Dudes Talking episode 35 on the We've Read the Documents channel. This evening, I'm very happy to have with me Greg McCarron from one half of the Antedote podcast, or I guess YouTube stream that he does with Jeremy Roth Gushel. I've been following Greg and Jeremy's work on the Antidote for a very long time now. It's been almost, I want to say, about a year and a half to 2 years. The first time I had heard Greg was on, I want to say, Adam Green's channel, No More News. And when he was talking about the Council for National Policy, I knew as soon as I heard Greg that he was definitely one of our guys, and he was very knowledgeable. And I've been listening to the Antidote ever since, and I'm greatly appreciative of what both Jeremy and Greg have put forth when it comes to discussing conspiracies and current events and news. And 9 times out of 10, I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, I agree with the both of them. Greg, welcome. Say hi to everybody. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the kind introduction and for the nice words. And I certainly share that sentiment with. I share similar feelings about your work. And no one's going to agree 100%. I mean, if we did, then that would I think it would be a pro. I don't think any two individuals are going to agree 100% on everything. But I think with certainly the vast majority of the time, I think our views really do come together on a lot of these things, and through somewhat different yet somewhat similar at the same time kind of evolutions into getting into this kind of mindset that we're currently in. I do think that our viewpoints much more than not certainly coincide in are very similar to each other. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, Greg. I'm definitely happy to have you here. So, what got you started in your research and you becoming so knowledgeable in parapolitics? What got you started in all this?
Well, so okay, I got to go back to okay. I'm 31. I graduated from high school in 2006. Excuse me. I hope I'm talking loud enough. I got out of high school in 2006, and then just I forget what happened, but I heard this just a moment. I cannot quite tell you when exactly this happened, but I started following Ron Paul, and I really came to like what he was having to say. And I'd never been political before this. And for me, it seems to be that my first memory of like noticing something political and really running with it was in the May 2007 presidential debate where Ron Paul, and now I notice now the problems with what Ron Paul is particularly saying in this debate now, but I didn't know this then. Ron Paul was talking about how September 11th and foreign policies and things like events like September 11th are the result of blowback, that this is the result of what the U.S. does in other countries. And then Rudy Giuliani responded to him by saying that's the worst excuse for terrorism I've ever heard in my life. So I can't pinpoint exact moment. That's the first time I can think of something really clicking with me as far as politics. Is then I started to follow Ron Paul, and then in something that's really related to what we really zeroed in on with the Council for National Policy, very directly related to that. I actually got into Amway for about 4 years. So in Amway, you're very much indoctrinated into this. You guess very basically you're indoctrinated into evangelical dominionism, and through a combination of very cult-like, you could say, mindset instilled in people as what with the combination of a strong belief in free enterprise and then this very particular strain of quote unquote Christianity, I think. And so I was in that for 4 years. We had people like Oliver North coming to speak at conferences. Bob McEwen, who's currently the executive director of the Council for National Policy, spoke at our events. Frank Luntz, and then there were others as well. But I was doing that for 4 years, and then I kind of actually really started to distance myself from Amway right around the height of the 2012 presidential campaign, which of course was the second time Ron Paul ran for president. And I was much more actively pro Ron Paul. I had signed up as a delegate for the Missouri State Republican Convention in 2012, and then I even ran for the Republican Party committee in Jackson County, Missouri, Kansas City area, which I was inspired to do because of the Ron Paul campaign. And then and then I was distancing myself from Amway, so I kind of slowly started to get out of that mindset that's instilled through that whole process. And then for me, I kind of had a moment where I broke out of the GOP thing. I basically stopped. I basically gave up my GOP position without even like resigning or anything. I just stopped. I stopped associating with it. This would have been around the time that Rand Paul endorsed Mitt Romney. And then from there, it's kind of been a slow development into slowly getting more conspiratorial in terms of my thinking, kind of coming to an understanding of the lies of September 11th and the reality of what we call false flags. And then from there, your thinking really just evolves on from there. So it's been a process of about 7 to 8 years of just really I would say evolving in my mindset. And I mean, when I first launched the Antedote 3.5 years ago, I certainly didn't see things to the extent that I do now. When it came to Trump, did not vote for Trump. I actually voted Green Party. I voted third party because I couldn't bring myself to do it. But I came pretty close to endorsing Trump. And then slowly, once Trump came along, I started to see things for what they are, and so, or I believe what they are. And so now I'm totally seeing that this entire right-wing movement is basically it's fake, it's artificial, it's not real, it's not genuine, and that the process that got Donald Trump elected, or you might say selected, in 2016 was much more extensive than I think most people, including us, realize. So that, in a nutshell, is my political, I guess you could call it, evolution over the last 12 or so years.
Yeah, I mean, myself, I voted for Donald Trump. I was fooled. I had, been a conspiracy researcher since 2008.
On that note, John, I'll say
Yes.
that I didn't vote for Trump, but I was very much taken in by the rhetoric, the idea of seeing him as a lesser evil, especially compared to Clinton. And I certainly I came close to it. I came close to voting Trump. And so I did. It took me a few months after the election to kind of break out of that idea of Trump as a lesser evil. Actually, it probably took me close to a year to do that. So.
Yeah, I don't know why I did not. I did not figure it out until he started. It was in two stages. The first time was when he started filling up his cabinet with members of the Council for National Policy. Because I would watch Josh Reeves's Secret Right, Volume 1 and Volume 2 documentary during the election a friend of mine had sent to me. And I just dismissed it. I was like, well, I would have already known about this. Alex Jones would have already told me. And then after that, I was like, okay, well, I started seeing the same people. He started putting the same people in the cabinet. And I was like, okay, something's wrong here. And then I remember when I really became totally disillusioned with Trump was when the first time that we attacked that airfield in Syria. And I was like, yeah, this is more par for the course. And then Kavanaugh, of course, the Democrats went after Kavanaugh for Blasey Ford. But in reality, Kavanaugh had covered up the Vince Foster murder, was a law partner, he wasn't a partner, he was a lawyer for Kirkland and Ellis. So I wasn't a fan of Trump, definitely by that point. And then that's when I really started, digging deep into the CMP, Greg, and that's when I realized that that Trump had spoken to the Council for National Policy, where he was vetted by them in 2016. And his speech is one of the only ones that are not online for us to listen to. But you can go listen to Rand Paul's, who I played, his vetting speech for president to the CMP, where he was kissing their butt significantly. And I know Rick Santorum has a speech on there. Lindsey Graham has a speech. And even Mike Pence spoke as well, twice since then. So definitely Trump is, especially all the amount of people that he has in his cabinet that have even spoken to the CMP or are members in the CMP themselves, he's definitely Council for National Policy backed, just like Ronald Wilson Reagan was, just like George W. Bush was. George H.W. Bush kind of swung both sides, the CFR and the CNP. CNP didn't really like George H.W. too much, except for him going to war in the Middle East during the first Gulf War, and them torpedoing John Tower and putting in Dick Cheney. They very much like that. So what do you have to say to any of that stuff, Greg?
I agree with your general assessment of Bush, and I think that was a lot of the suspicions regarding W. Bush from that same sector. Even though the CNP, Bush was basically selected by them and vetted in a similar manner to what you just described with Trump. And we got to remember, even real people want to say that like Trump is like something we've never seen before in terms of the quote non-interventionist rhetoric. And while certainly there's a different dynamic with Trump than with George W. Bush, let's also remember that prior to being elected president in 2000, George W. Bush was talking about a quote more humble foreign policy. So I mean, you did have that dynamic with Bush. But I'm interested with your take on the whole John Tower thing, because to me, John Tower is a figure who's right up into his eyeballs with Robert Maxwell and with things related to his activities, and also you can look at the history of Promise. And Tower was seemed pretty up. What's your take on perhaps people wanting Tower to be removed and moved out of the way with Cheney in his place?
I just think John Tower was too dirty for the CNP. And so they wanted to put Cheney in. That's my opinion. Do you have one?
I mean, no. I mean that makes as much sense as anything. I mean,
things were coming out about Iran-Contra,
Sure.
and they just had to get rid of them. I definitely don't think that John Tower was our guy in any stretch of the.
Yeah. Well, I mean, similarly speaking, I mean, Robert Maxwell, they died within, their deaths within 6 months of each other. So
it's just them cleaning up loose ends.
That makes sense. Okay, I was just curious about that.
I guess. I mean, that's my guess. I don't know. I just know that they did replace him with Dick Cheney.
That's true.
Of course, Dick Cheney is one of the CNP darlings. He also spoke to the CNP many times while he was vice president.
Cheney's an interesting figure because Cheney can play the moderate when he needs to as well. So,
yeah, I guess moderate in quotation marks.
right. Yeah,
the guy with no heart, he just got a robotic heart put in.
There's ever evidence for like the idea of like some of these people who will just never die, like getting like some type of disgusting like harvesting transplants, something. There's people like that. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about that, but
no, I definitely agree with you on that. So, what about let's move on to your story is somewhat similar to mine, except I was a neocon up until I heard Alex Jones in 2008. Hey, I'm raised in the South. Hey. What do you expect? I mean, I was raised by the politics of my grandfather, even though my father was a conspiracy theorist and a leftist. God bless him. I did not believe him at the time. I wish I could tell him now of how right he was about things.
It's interesting because not as many people come at it from a conspiratorial angle from the left as opposed to the right. So. He still
thought that Clinton was okay though on certain things. He was still a Clinton apologist on certain things, but he still didn't necessarily trust Clinton and thought he was part of the world order, which I mean obviously he was, but or still is. But what did you think when you heard this week, Greg, that Alan Morton Dershowitz and Kenneth Starr, who were both, lawyers for Jeffrey Epstein, Alan Dershowitz being a friend with Jeffrey Epstein and of course being accused by Virginia Roberts Giuffre of molesting her and being a part of the Epstein sex trafficking, as well as both Starr and Dershowitz working for Kirkland and Ellis. Not Dershowitz. Starr worked for Kirkland and Ellis. And Starr, of course, being a Council for National Policy member as well. What do you think about? You think there's some real winners? With Pam Bondi supposedly circumventing Florida, joining the Trump University lawsuit, and getting a hefty donation around that same time. What do you think about Trump picking these lawyers to represent him in his Senate trial? What do you got on that?
Well, I'd like to say I'm surprised, but really, I'm not surprised at all. I think that maybe there are some people who are supporting Trump who kind of who might be a little surprised by this. And I mean, I just hope that, I mean, although you can just see that this naturally is the kind of people that Trump would surround himself with for defense. And I wonder, does anybody ask the question? I mean, even there's a lot of, I think there are still some pretty well-meaning people out there who I think are being misled in just simply dismissing what we call Russiagate, which is actually much bigger than just Russiagate, the way the media plays it out to be, as being a nothing burger, to quote Van Jones, to Project Veritas, or as just being a myth or a fabrication or something that's, you know, if you listen to the right wingers, it's the deep state trying to destroy Trump. If you listen to the left, it's distracting us from the real issues that we can really that are distracting us from paying attention to the real damage that Donald Trump's actually doing to the country and all this. But do people who, I think there are some well-meaning people out there who still kind of see this, have this idea based on the types of media that they've listened to, and maybe just because they see just how terrible, you know, the U.S. Deep state is, the liberal establishment is, that's very much pushing this, I think, this weaponized Cold War boogeyman style rhetoric about Russia. But I would wonder if these well-meaning people out there who might still be into this whole idea that there's nothing to this whole collusion narrative, that we just need to, that it needs to stop. Ask yourself, you know, why is someone like Alan Dershowitz, not even to get into Ken Starr, who's also a bad actor, but particularly Alan Dershowitz, why is someone like Alan Dershowitz have such this vested interest in defending Donald Trump so vehemently? And I think when you look at Dershowitz's history, and then you also look at Trump's history, and you look at the kind of causes that they're into, this really a combination of this extreme pro-Israel activism combined with the types of history and people who Dershowitz has defended, and then you get into, obviously, you bring in the Epstein factor into this. I think it paints a picture that there's something much deeper going on than just simply Dershowitz being the man, the First Amendment radically pro-First Amendment attorney who just defends the controversial, so to speak. I mean, the way that Dershowitz wants to paint it, and also the media gives him the out to do this with their coverage of Dershowitz, that he's defending Trump because it's the right thing to do, because Trump deserves a fair hearing and all this. But I think when you actually look at the history, it's much more than that, with someone like Dershowitz coming to Trump's defense so passionately. So I'm hoping that for people out there who, a combination of, like, you know, Trump supporters who might not be fans of Dershowitz, and also for people who are well-meaning people who truly do buy into, like, the idea that there's nothing to this whole collusion narrative. I hope Alan Dershowitz is front and center constantly in this, during this impeachment process, out there defending Trump as much as possible and as passionately as possible, because I want these people to really start raising questions about what this all means. And if Dershowitz is involved, then there's something much bigger going on than just him just simply coming to Trump's defense because it's the right thing to do, because he deserves a fair hearing.
I've already tried, Greg. It ain't gonna happen. I've been trying on Twitter. Q made a drop on April the 2018, 11. Thank you, Alan. Welcome aboard, Freedom. About him joining the legal team. So the QAnon people are way back on board again because, you know, I believe that the QAnon operation is run by the Council for National Policy. It's likely that Steve Bannon is involved to some degree. Mike Flynn is involved to some degree within it. Possibly others. I know some people have argued maybe Jared Kushner are involved with the Q operation. Jerome Corsi.
To me, the most logical, this is my take, and it's just a theory, you know, I'm careful to say this is not fact because I can't prove it, obviously, but to me what makes the most sense with a QAnon is that it basically comes right out of the extension of the Michael Flynn network. Through people, I would say somebody like possibly Ezra Cohen Watnick would be a front and center, would be a key figure if you want to look at the types of people who could very well be behind QAnon. It's interesting. I don't know if your listeners though are too familiar with Cohen Watnick.
I haven't really discussed Ezra Cohen Watnick, but I know of him. You guys had covered. I remember when Oh, my friends are gonna kill me. Who was the guy? Thomas Wichter, that used to be on Twitter, who was a nutcase, but once every blue moon, he may say something that was witty. I remember he used to say that Ezra Kohl Watnick did not exist. And then it was hilarious that Sebastian Gorka actually, like, pulled him down on Twitter and was like, "Hey, what are you talking about, Thomas? Like, he obviously exists." So why don't you tell the audience out there about Ezra Cohen Watnick?
Well, Ezra Cohen Watnick was a close aide to he was part of Michael Flynn's brought in with Michael Flynn when he became National Security Advisor to the National Security Council, and he stayed on until for several months after Flynn was removed, and he was in there. The Atlantic actually did a profile on him, the man who McMaster couldn't fire, although he eventually was removed. And in this article, it's very interesting that Cohen Watnick appeared to have a close relationship with both Jared Kushner, and also had a relationship with Steve Bannon, to the point to where Bannon was asked about Cohen Watnick. He would not discuss him. I believe it was in an Atlantic. This is a quote from an Atlantic article on Ezra Cohen Watnick. I believe the article is titled "The Mystery of Ezra Cohen Watnick," and it came out of the Atlantic. So then, with Cohen Watnick, he, along with a couple of other Flynn National Security Council holdovers, I believe one of them was a man by the name of Rich Higgins, who wrote a memo to President Trump about the deep state and cultural Marxism, and a deep state memo and then also the other name is escaping me. I believe it was Derek Harvey was the other NSA, I want to say the other staffer who was removed around this time when there was a bit of a purging within the National Security Council. So my take on this is that you see that if you look into Cohen Watnick, and there's not even a whole heck of a lot of information out there about Cohen Watnick. I mean, you can find out in his college years he was close to Chabad. He was involved in Chabad-related causes at the University of Pennsylvania, and I believe he was a protege of a combination of Frank Gaffney and David Horowitz in his college years. But outside of that,
which are both CNP members, yes. Frank Gaffney and David Horowitz, major Council for National Policy members, and also ardent. It's the Muslims that have done everything.
Yes, Horowitz hosts an annual conference with a lot of the CNP bigwigs. So down in Florida, I believe it is. Restoration Weekend, I believe is what he calls it. So Cohen Watnick, I think he's really still not a whole heck of a lot known about him. He is a pretty mysterious figure, but he shapes up to me as somebody who was pretty important, because I noticed that as soon as Cohen Watnick was removed from the NSC, within a day or so, there were articles that began to be published on Mark Levin's website, a conservative review, and that were also carried through outlets such as Breitbart, and then the Zionist Organization of America with Morton Klein started to demand that McMaster be fired from that Trump fire McMaster. And so this major campaign came out against McMaster, where the Zionist pro-Israel forces within the Trump administration and within his support base really brought the knives out for McMaster. And it seems the immediate aftermath of the news coming out of the removal of Ezra Cohen Watnick and these other close Flynn associates, including Rich Higgins, who wrote this deep state memo that was directed at a memo about the deep state directed at President Trump. So my take is that it seems to me what makes most sense to me is that QAnon rose up about 2 months later, and this was seen as like a counter coup, right? And I could see this perhaps as a counter coup to what? Is it a counter coup to this you might call it purging that took place under McMaster in the National Security, in his role as National Security Advisor to these close associates of Michael Flynn, who clearly had influence within, I think, within the administration. And then you mentioned Alex Jones and Jerome Corsi. At first, I mean, we got to remember Alex Jones and Jerome Corsi were big time
Oh, yes,
backers
they
of
were. Oh,
QAnon.
yes,
Yes,
they
I
were.
mean, I still wish Jerome Corsi hadn't taken down his live YouTube streams that he was doing back in early 2018, where he was just singing QAnon's praises every single day. And one of the things he said was that when Trump appointed Ezra Cohen Watnick, I believe, to a position in the Department of Justice, and I haven't seen any updates recently as it relates to Cohen Watnick in the DOJ, but he was appointed to a position within the DOJ by Trump. And Jerome Corsi said that it was like Ezra Cohen Watnick joining the Department of Justice is like QAnon himself getting into the DOJ. So I ran with that, and it seems to me that the most logical conclusion I can think of with QAnon is that it is an extension. This is my educated guess, that it is an extension of this Michael Flynn network. At the least, a reaction to it, and at most, it's directly being run by people within that particular strain. And when with the Corsi and with Alex Jones, I mean, these are two people who would know, considering types of connections they have. And we Corsi and Jones only distanced themselves from QAnon when Corsi was beginning to be outed by people who were,
Yes.
by some Q
Yes.
followers, as basically being an agent for Israel and the international B'nai B'rith. And then Alex Jones kind of followed Jerome Corsi in disavowing Q. But even at this point, if you actually listen to what they say, outside of attributing the great things Trump is doing to QAnon and his plans to rein in the deep state, it's still indistinguishable to this day outside of one person saying it's Q doing this, whereas with Trump, with Alex Jones or Jerome Corsi, whoever else you want to name, it's unnamed patriots that really have this influence over Trump. But it's still the same narrative. And even after Alex Jones disavowed QAnon, which I believe was damage control, Alex Jones was still on air saying that he knew the QAnon had been hijacked, and he knew the original QAnon, and he met the original QAnon, and it was people very close to General Flynn. So.
Yeah, Alex Jones also still to this day occasionally circles back after saying that QAnon was likely to be artificial intelligence. Now circles back and praises QAnon a lot, actually.
It's funny.
Yeah, it is. And so one thing about Ezra Cohen Watnick that I've put together now, I've been doing some research, very similar to you guys about him, and you probably know more about him than I do, but there's a few things I want to mention. Is one, he at one time had worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence after his graduation. Of course, Jack Pisabic, also being former Navy intelligence, and Pisabic also seems to really much just like Cernovich, Ezra Cohen Watnick, and Michael Flynn. So I think there might be some sort of connection there, as well as Ezra Cohen Watnick underwent training at Camp Peary, which is also the place they call the farm, the CIA training military installation. So he was trained by the Central Intelligence Agency. So Ezra Cohen Watnick is a spook. He ain't just no one, all right? But you never hear about him at all.
Also, Cohen Watnick's name popped up in 2017 as a source of information to David Nunes, who is up to his eyeballs in all of this Trump impeachment stuff. As he's been one of the most ardent backers of Trump, and now if we're to listen to this, Len Parnas, this former Giuliani associate, you could argue, I don't know if he's a genuine or not, but I mean, he's certainly come out as a whistleblower in his conversations about Nunes being present when certain meetings were going on with Giuliani and Ukrainians. And so Cohen Watnick was said to be a source of confidential information that was passed on about the alleged mass surveillance against President Trump to Devin Nunes from Cohen Watnick. So
that doesn't surprise me. And then, so he's currently working for the Department of Justice, Watnick is. I mean, as far as QAnon is concerned, like you had talked about on one of my favorite episodes, the solo episode that you did, on the Eagle Forum, Flynn was signing books Where We Go When We Go All. And his brother, pardon, I've forgotten his name, maybe Flynn's brother's name, Greg, he also promotes QAnon theories on his Twitter account. So it does seem to me that QAnon is an operation by members or the Council for National Policy in a way to try to disarm conspiracy researchers that used to be in the past realized that all presidents, no matter what side, Republican or Democrat, were not for us. And I think it is a way to suck them in into just trusting the plan and grabbing their popcorn and everything will be perfectly fine. And to not look at the dirty deeds that the CMP are currently performing, just like that they have been performing since its foundation since 1981.
Oh yeah, I mean this. And unfortunately, it's worked. I gotta say, it's worked really. It's very effective. Unfortunately, I say that with a lot of. I say that sadly. It's been very effective at doing just what you described there.
Yeah, very much so. What do you think's going to happen now with this whole Senate trial?
I think that I think at this point there's two major possibilities, and to be honest, Jeremy and I, we weren't so sure that it was actually going to come to this because at first, we had talked about how it appeared that Nancy Pelosi was very much not willing to take on this whole impeachment thing. It seemed like she might have been playing a similar role to what she played in the latter stages of the Bush administration when she was actively in her capacity as House Speaker was actually a primary force in ensuring that articles of impeachment were not that an impeachment process did not go through with Bush over the Iraq War that congressmen such as Dennis Kucinich were pushing in the last years of the Bush administration. But it turns out that it's gotten to this level, and the House did vote for it. My guess is that the Senate is not going to vote for impeachment. I could be wrong if enough damning information comes out that even there might be a few Republicans who might join the Democrats in voting for this. My guess is that's not going to happen. But I see two possibilities with this. One is that either the Senate's going to vote against impeachment, Trump's going to remain president, and he gets reelected because millions of people are going to believe that he was just a victim of this massive witch hunt, which I think will galvanize people to vote for him in a reelection campaign. And then that in a combination of really vilifying the far left as being whoever the left candidate is. And then the other possibility I see is that, okay, Trump could very well be impeached. But if it happens, it's not going to be because it's going to be done in a very limited fashion. And that basically, if it does happen, Donald Trump and maybe a few people around him are going to serve as, fall guys, but the much bigger operation, both domestically and globally, that was put in place to elect Trump as a major part of a very long-term operation that's been going on, I think, for decades. But Trump's selection was a major part of this bigger picture that's going on. I think that you're going to see Trump and a few other people, if he is impeached, serve as fall guys, but the much bigger operation is going to ultimately be still put in place and will be protected and will still be covered and shielded if that happens.
Yeah. Did you ever read the article by Ann Nelson that was published in Salon?
You sent it my way, and I was able to get it was regarding Mike Pence and his history is whereas Trump was vetted and was ultimately decided upon by the Council for National Policy, Mike Pence is basically a creation of it.
Yes, he was groomed.
Yes.
I'm going to read a little bit of it here. Let me put it up on the screen. Now, of course, I don't endorse Salon. I know they're infamous for their article defending pedophilia. I'm a pedophile, not a monster. But this is Ann Nelson. She wrote a book called The Shadow Network, which it has a very heavily leftist spin, but it still has one of the most thorough written books on the Council for National Policy, because the whole entire book is about the CMP, that I've ever read. So here is her latest piece for Salon. This powerful group groomed Mike Pence for the White House. Impeachment could complicate their plans. The Council for National Policy, a major booster of Pence's career, brought crucial evangelical votes to Trump. With the prospect of an impeachment looming over Washington this month, the conversation has naturally turned to Vice President Mike Pence, both as a possible successor to the presidency and as a possible candidate for impeachment himself. Standing in the eye of the storm on October 5th, 2019, Pence chose to tweet a photo of himself at the podium of an organization that is unknown to most Americans. So that's him speaking to the CMP. Council for National Policy is one of the oldest and most effective organizations in the history of the conservative movement, he wrote. He thanked former Ohio Congressman and CMP Executive Director Bob McEwen and the more than 400 fellow conservatives for coming out and fighting for the principles that made this country great. Pence's anodyne statement can be viewed as both life insurance for his career and the ongoing repayment of an old debt. These reasons have less to do with Trump than with the inner workings of the Republican Party. Over the past few decades, the traditional GOP has been overtaken by partisans of the radical right, now entrenched in the party's infrastructure. This shadow network of hardline organizations, activists, and donors stands ready to outlast the Trump presidency. The story of the CMP, a hub in this network, is a case study of how the durability and strategic capacity of right-wing institutions have shaped the American political landscape. So she's just going over the basic. I want to get to the part. One co-founder, Martin Blackwell, claims to have trained over 200,000 conservative candidates, and that was who Rand Paul was kissing his butt. He's kissing Martin Blackwell's butt in his speech back in 2016. And political activists through his Leadership Institute, among them Mike Pence. Another co-founder, ideological architect Paul Weyrich, instituted a celebrated weekly lunch not far from the Capitol to talk strategy. Congressman Mike Pence briefed the group on a weekly basis. In 2006, the New York Times quoted Weyrich's verdict on Pence. He is what I've been waiting in terms of leadership. So this article leads the groundwork for something. Okay, so my belief is what's going to happen is I think that there's going to be a broker convention. The Democrats have no one. Even Bernie is going to get robbed this time again, like he did last time, and the old man is going to he might not get a black eye. Bernie might not get a black eye this time, but he will put his tail between his legs, and there's going to be a broker convention, and I believe that Hillary Clinton, who's still been her pack onward together, she's got a lot of reserves, will be the Democratic nominee for president. And she will be going against Donald Trump, who will not be convicted at the Senate trial. And we're going to get a Clinton versus Trump, too. Because the Democrats are going to be so pissed off that Trump did not, get the guilty verdict in a Senate trial, that they will swallow Hillary Clinton, who will rise up the ashes as the savior of the Democrat Party who cannot get their crap together. And my likelihood is I think she's going to nominate Elizabeth Warren for vice president. I think that's really going to happen. I've been calling this for a long time. However, there is about a 5 or 10% chance where the CMP vetted Donald Trump, but they groomed Mike Pence. And just like the Council for National Policy was behind the failed impeachment process of Bill Clinton, and that Bill Clinton did not get convicted by the Senate, and Ken Starr did not go after the Whitewater crimes, or did not go after the crimes of Mena, Arkansas, that would have exposed both the CMP and the CFR, both sides of the world order pyramid. He instead went after Linda Tripp and Monica Lewinsky in charges of perjury against Bill Clinton, who he was impeached in the House but was not convicted in the Senate. They are also possibly behind this impeachment process, too, that it is not the Democrats that are really behind it. It's actually the Council for National Policy themselves, who want Mike Pence in. Because, as I said, Mike Pence was groomed for this position. He is their boy. Trump, though I do believe, does listen to a lot of the CMP and has also been groomed through different ways, with his father being part of the John Birch Society and Alex Jones talking about that at length, and Roy Cohn and everything like that. He may not be 100% their guy, where Pence would be. So it could go either way. My best guess is still we're going to get a brokered Democratic convention with Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren as the nomination for president and vice president for the Democratic Party, or Democrat Party, should I say. And then the Republican Party will run Trump and Pence again, and Trump will be exonerated in a Senate trial and will not be convicted. What do you have to say to all that?
I mean, I can't dismiss any of those as possibilities. I would say with regard to Mike Pence, I mean, I could see, and this is something that's been talked about by people going back all the way to the 2016 election, and I'm wary of it because in part it is a it is a way to run cover for Trump by asserting that like Pence is actually like the deep state's guy who's in there as vice president, and that Trump could be removed and replaced at any time by Pence. So I'm wary of buying into that of that aspect of this particular narrative I'm about to lay out. But I could see a chance of I could see a chance if Trump is impeached and Pence takes his place. I mean, I could see that happening. Although to me, it seems like the kind of people that if there's any type of real like pushback against like the influence of like the CNP and the Dominionist movement and this evangelical Zionist cause, the people who are really concerned about that seem to be would be even more against a Mike Pence presidency than a Donald Trump presidency. But I mean, I could see there being
but the Republican base would be so mad that their guy had been unseated.
That's true.
That's if these elections are completely rigged from the get-go. Okay, I mean, look at how the CNP rigged 2004 with the help of Connell. Okay, and who else was all involved? Karl Rove and
Blackwell.
John Kenneth Blackwell. Like the voting irregularities that happened in the 2016 election or the 2018 election, especially Florida. So,
yeah.
I mean, Stop the Steal, CNP Alexander, who's very good friends with John Kenneth Blackwell. Anyway, I'm just saying that let's not get that step, which I do believe more than likely through George's work from cavdev.org, that more than likely voting is mostly rigged on the national level to that point. But let's just say it's not for a moment. You would have all the people, the MAGA, I mean, the Republican base would be more unified now more than ever if Trump got convicted in the Senate. You understand? Like, yeah. Especially if the Democrats nominated Hillary Clinton, that's still gonna turn off some Democrats.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, and ultimately, I'm coming with. I mean, I am with you on this. I'm not sure about Hillary Clinton in particular, but I mean, it's certainly something that I'm not. I'm not going to dismiss. The
reason why I go with Clinton is because they've been priming the narrative with articles on both sides, and I can send them to you. For like,
you don't think they'll run Michelle Obama like some people seem to be fearful of?
I just don't think they can. I really don't. I think it's too soon. I really do. I mean, if it is, I owe you an apology. I'll come here and say I'm wrong. But I really, honestly think it's Hillary Clinton, just because they've been priming it for 2 years, and people, constantly talking about it on conservative media. CNP types like Rush Limbaugh and Alex Jones, Michael Savage, just priming that it's going to happen. So it may not, but
it could. But I also do hold out the possibility that it's to continue. That it's also necessary to keep Hillary Clinton in people's minds as much as possible, as a reminder to people that we could have had this if it wasn't for Trump. So, but I mean, you could be right too, though. Going back to the whole Pence thing, I'm ultimately following with where I think you were going with this on Pence, that while I do see a small chance of a possibility of a Trump being replaced by Pence, ultimately I come down on the side of not seeing it happen, because honestly I think that Trump is perfect for like people in positions of power as a chaos president. I really do. It's like he's the chaos president. I think he's playing this role perfectly, although the one caveat I would hold out.
You mean as Lance Wallenau with his Trump Cyrus coins are saying he's God's chaos candidate?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes, but even outside of that, I think like even like the deep state that's obviously so opposed to Trump, the people who really make high level decisions within whatever we want to call the deep state, I think that they're really at the end of the day are content with Trump as the chaos candidate as well. But in the whole what we were just talking about with the Pence factor, I see a small possibility of it. I really don't see it happening, but I think the thing would be that Trump is a perfect puppet, but the thing with Pence is that Pence does not have the eccentricities of Trump personality wise, and he would probably be would be smoother with Pence. But at the same time, though, you're also right that at this point, the only way that like Trump, if the decisions are already made and the script's already been laid out on impeachment, which it may very well have been already. If that's the case, the only way that like there's going to be a green light to a Trump impeachment and like an ultimate, possibly even indictment or some type of legal action against him, the only way that happened would be if people in positions of power and influence really wanted there to be a major domestic really wanted some major chaos to break out domestically, because there are millions and millions of people who would be very, very angry and outraged by that. So while I was laying out the possibility of a Pence, like, maybe replacing Trump, I really, at the end of the day, I don't see something like that happening for that reason. But also, we could very well take into consideration that very well could be an impeachment, that Trump and some other people could be fall guys. But even then, like the wild card factor, I mean, if Trump truly is this loose cannon, what would he start revealing if he felt like he was about to go down? So there's a lot of things that could take place with this. I mean, we have no idea what's going to happen. There's a lot of things that could happen.
We really don't, and there's a lot of things that could happen between now and then. I did think it was going to go to the Senate, that the impeachment, procedure and everything. I had some friends that were saying, no, it's not going to happen, that, Nancy Pelosi's not going to send the articles over to the Senate, and I always thought that she would, and she did. Now, whether or not Mitch McConnell just throws the whole thing out, if it turns into a circus or whatever, I don't know. That may happen. I know they already primed the so-called nuclear button for that to happen. What they're priming in the news, trying to scare everybody. The same rhetoric they always do with nukes. You know what I mean? So
my prediction, or my thought, has always been that the Democrats, a big part of what they're one of the big things they're pushing is for John Bolton to testify. And my suspicion has been, if that happens, that Bolton will actually put out a testimony that might actually benefit Trump. I mean, that'd be a storyline to watch as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely, all the Democrats be like, oh, that's right, John Bolton's going to tell him like it is. And then John Bolton
he's
actually
be the next hero of the resistance. Right?
Nah, he's not going to be John McCain running in to cast his vote vote to downvote Obamacare.
I think Bolton's I think Bolton's like a step too far, even for like the generic resistance to embrace.
No. John Bolton, long-term Council for National Policy member, long-term neocon, long-term swamp dweller.
And if we're to believe some of the stories about his old relationship and accusations, I think even like Larry Flint, who came after, who's been known for having all kinds of secrets on people through his hustler smut operation, that there's a lot of, in the old Plato's Retreat in New York City, there's even some other bigger issues of compromise with someone like John Bolton, possibly. So.
Yeah, I can see that.
Anyhow, getting off on another digression there, but there's a lot of things that could happen. I mean, anybody who says that they know what's going to happen, I would not listen to them, because none of us know exactly how this is going to play out.
We can only give educated guesses. We have no idea. And so the Trump trial is supposedly supposed to start tomorrow.
That's great, and I hope Dershowitz is just front and center for people to have to come to grips with.
Well, he is giving the opening statements, but then again, the MAGA hat people, they've already, Dershowitz gets results, and the Q people say trust the plan. Q already said welcome to the team. He's going to flip. So, of course, I tell these people they can't talk about Epstein anymore. They've lost their ability. They've lost their card about talking about Epstein because it's ludicrous.
But no. I guess Trump has flipped Dershowitz. Either Dershowitz is genuinely flipped and is a genuine patriot now, or Trump via Q has the goods on Dershowitz and is blackmailing Dershowitz and has Dershowitz by the balls. You can't dismiss that possibility either.
Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, of course, I'm not being serious when I say that, but I mean that could be, Trump could just be running a massive blackmail compromise his own blackmail compromise operation.
You mean the one that Roy Cohn supposedly ran, that brownstone operation?
This is being done for good, though, John. I was telling you the silly thing that Dave Janda, one of the YouTube Q people, came out with, that the reason why Bill Barr was brought on was because Bush, at George H.W. Bush's funeral, Donald Trump and George W. Bush struck
I remember
that Bush would get immunity for his crimes if if his Bush family would get immunity for their crimes if Bush helped Trump drain the swamp. And
Remember
bring
all
down
those letters that were given at that funeral, and the look on Jeb Bush's
What's in
face?
the letters? What's in the letters? What's in the letters? Oh, Obama and Bush's, their faces just dropped when they saw the letters.
Yeah, and of course, one thing I forgot to mention on my Alan Dershowitz
And
stream was that he was supposedly legal counsel for the Atlanta child rapist and murderer William Williams. So you can add him to the list of defending
yeah,
people that definitely.
yeah.
I mean, it's just it never ends. Why would anybody say I want Alan Dershowitz? He gets results, but overlook all the crimes he's done previously in the past. Like all the MAGA hat people, that's what they're saying about Dershowitz, where they would not shut up about Epstein. Last week, about the crimes of Epstein and everything like that, and now today they're like they won't even talk about it. Like it didn't even exist. Because Dershowitz is on the team now. It's so silly.
I would say it really seems to create a quandary for the kind of people, maybe some of the more anti-Zionist, outright anti-Jewish types who believe in Q because Q says it's saving Israel for last. So that really creates a dilemma for some of those people, I would think, right? Maybe not.
Nah, never. No, they never have a crisis of conscience and realize that Trump's not their guy. I saw maybe a few people maybe break a little bit of the cognitive dissonance, but not most. And now the Q people who will say that Dershowitz is flipped and trust the plan will still continue talking about Epstein but leave Trump out. So that's where we're at now.
Oh, for sure, Trump. Yeah, I mean Trump.
Even though, did you see? Did I send you where Jane Doe #1?
Yes.
Came out in her lawsuit that
It was
Trump
published in the New York Daily News, wasn't it?
Yeah, that Trump and Epstein were sizing her up.
Yeah.
And Epstein was like, "Do you like that?" Pretty much. I'm paraphrasing it. And Trump was like, "Yeah." And she felt uncomfortable about that. At Mar-a-Lago, of all places.
That's one of the things with Trump that drives me crazy with people is that, we got a glimpse into Trump's character, or lack thereof, with the Access Hollywood tape, right? That was a glimpse into his character. And honestly, that was a limited hangout if we go back and look at that with the benefit of hindsight. Because, the real damning stuff, like the media really wanted to destroy this man, the media would have ran with the Katie Johnson story. Whether it's true or not, if you're really out to destroy Trump, you'd run with something like that rather than just what people could easily dismiss as, well, he's just talking like guys talk. This is how men talk. Pat Robertson called it macho talk. I remember that, as a man of God, that was just macho talk, and Trump's still our guy. But, that would have been something to really, and also it appears that there's evidence that there were influential people within the Trump campaign and in close circles to that knew that this was coming out, and almost like it was preemptively done so that like the Trump campaign could plan their counterattack as well. You were sending me some stuff with that is related to that with the whole Access Hollywood thing.
Yeah, and of course we know that David Pecker from National Enquirer is friends with Trump. He buried or attempted to bury both stories, both Katie Johnson and the Access Hollywood. So that doesn't surprise me. Now I've read Katie Johnson, all three of her lawsuits. Her first one having no involvement with Lisa Bloom whatsoever. It was just her filing it in California with Tiffany Doe, who worked with Epstein, who the National Enquirer, funny enough, somehow knew her identity, knew how to get up with her. And in a story with Prince Andrew, she talks about how Prince Andrew loved to motorboat her breasts. The people that say that the Katie Johnson's story is nonsense, it's not. And Ed Opperman was the PI for the Katie Johnson case. So there are going to be more. Again, these girls were trafficked from Mar-a-Lago, and for all the cute people out there that say Trump knows everything in 16-dimensional chess and 32-dimensional chess, but somehow Mar-a-Lago is a big club and he doesn't know what's going on, then how does he not know that these girls are being trafficked by Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein right out of under his nose in Mar-a-Lago? Well, according to Jane Doe #1, he knew. Because they were there. And so you gotta throw that one out because you can't use that one anymore unless she's a liar.
Jeffrey I know Jeffrey, and he's a terrific guy. He likes his women on the younger side.
Exactly.
This is the same man who would go on the Howard Stern show, Donald Trump, and talk about how attractive his daughter, is then very young daughter, Ivanka it was. I mean, it's just, and it's really, I mean, it's really dark stuff. But going back to Trump and what to me, what lends credence to this whole Johnson thing with this alleged incident is that, and it's much more than an incident. I mean, but what lends credence to this is that there has been essentially a virtual, almost complete media blackout on it. A couple of websites picked up on it. I think the most press it actually got were through it might have been through maybe the UK tabloidy site Daily Mail. There may have been a couple of papers that ran stories on it. I know Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! Briefly mentioned it in news headlines, but then the lawsuit was quickly killed, and it was said that there were threats and all of that. But what to me is just the essential, just basically virtually a media blackout all over the political spectrum. I mean, people want to say that Juanita Broderick and Kathleen Willey and some of Clinton's accusers have been blacked out in the media, and there's an element of truth to that, but they've gotten a heck of a lot more attention than Katie Johnson has. And I mean, this is so damning in that this is actually an underaged at the time woman who's, at the time alleging that this happened to her, and there's a virtual media blackout on it. You can't find anything about it anywhere. My take is that if the media and all the deep state really wanted to destroy Trump like this, you'd run with this story. You would run with it every night, headlines everywhere, if you're actually looking to destroy the guy. But they haven't touched it. And also, one more thing I'll throw in there is that people say, well, Trump's not on the Lolita Express flight logs, and I don't want to get into whether or not that's true or not. There's people who believe he actually is. I don't know what the case is with that. But here's the thing: he doesn't need to be on the Lolita Express if he's being compromised with something like this taking place at Epstein's New York townhouse. So I would throw that out there as well. And then going back to my general last point about Trump and what you were bringing up with the relationship with Epstein and this New York Daily News story on this Jane Doe and Trump and Epstein basically sizing her up, it's just really awful to me how going all the way back to the Access Hollywood tape, and even after that, with the types of mental gymnastics that people, whether they are knowingly lying like a lot of these fake dominionist evangelical leaders are, or actually believe it, or also I'll throw Alex Jones in there as well, people like that, about that Trump is actually a person of good character who's either changed, or if he hasn't completely changed, then he's somebody who's being used by God to bring his will, because God always brings imperfect people to do his will, like King David, right? I mean, it's just really, you just think about the moral bankruptcy of these people really comes out when they just like defend someone like Donald Trump as their guy.
Yeah, but they'll do it until they're blue in the face because no one ever wants to admit that they're wrong.
Yeah.
So what about did you guys ever come across Alex Jones being connected to Blackwater and having Blackwater as security?
Yes, I believe he had a bodyguard by the name of Quentin, right?
Yeah, I think so. So where do you think he's getting all of this battle ready equipment to go to all of these rallies in? You think that's Blackwater sponsored?
That's a great point. I mean, he's clearly got I couldn't tell you where it's coming from, but I mean, Jones has clearly got some very influential backers and people that are, I mean, it has to be coming from somewhere. I mean, your guess is as good as mine on that. It could be. I mean, I don't know, though. I couldn't say for sure. I mean, we could only guess, but it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, I've always wondered that. I mean, I don't have no proof of that, but I've always wondered if that's where he's getting this equipment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair thing to it's a fair guess to make. I mean, it's fair game to ask that question because of the Alex Jones having, among other things, a Blackwater bodyguard. And then if Jones is to be believed, and I think that there, to an extent, he should be believed, and perhaps some of what he's saying is hyperbolic in this regard of what I'm about to talk about, but I think to a certain level he should be believed when he talks about the whole tip of the spear and Central Command out of Florida and General Boykin and the military counter coup that brought Trump into power, which Steve Pieczenik, who much like Katie Johnson is somebody no one talks about, despite Pechenik like making some of the most obvious statements of Sandy Hook being a complete of Sandy Hook being a hoax. His name didn't come up once in any of the Sandy Hook depositions of Alex Jones or Paul Joseph Watson or Rob Dew, and has not come up at all in any media stories about Sandy Hook. I mean, but so I do think that Jones, in that regard, when he talks about things like the Central Command and the tip of the spear and Delta Force and Jerry Boykin, you have to believe that at some level. And if that's the case, then it's a combination of that and also these Blackwater style operations could be where Jones is getting what you just talked about there, where he could be getting some of this material from, in terms of going to Virginia and riding in this tank and all that.
Yeah, very much so. I've always thought that as well. Do you think that is a possibility that Blackwater and military contractors, if there is a war in Syria or a war in Iran, that they might be heavily involved in that? Do you think that they might get some contracts because of the Trump administration?
Oh, definitely. And that, to me, Blackwater figures very much into the Trump administration's idea of, non-intervention, getting out of foreign entanglements, bringing our boys home and all that, and ending the wars. Is that what you see is, Afghanistan. Eric Prince was a key part of is the key to the administration, and also Stephen Feinberg of, Cerberus DynCorp. They're key players in this, what would be the post-Afghanistan war. If the U.S. forces were removed, it would basically be Eric Prince military private mercenaries taking over that effort. Eric Prince has also been on programs such as the Lou Dobbs Show on the Fox Business Channel, laying out his proposal for having a similar style operation in Syria with basically Eric Prince and his people training Arabs and from other countries nearby Syria to have a joint force that would replace any type of Western official American presence in Syria. And then I think when it comes to Iran, my belief has been that we're not actually going to see a hot war, so to speak, like certainly not an Iraq-style war break out in Iran. There could be airstrikes. I mean, that's certainly not off the table. I mean, we've already seen some of that. To a very small level so far to what it could be. But I certainly do not see like an Iraq-style military conflict breaking out with Iran during the Trump administration. But I think that a much more likely scenario you've seen since the killing of Soleimani, and then even in the aftermath of that, this downing of this Ukrainian flight that was downed in Iran. Jeremy laid out his theories on what he thinks happened to that in our two most recent shows, our last Antedote, and also the show that that we recorded earlier today that I'm going to be uploading later tonight after we finish this interview. Jeremy laid out his theories on what he thinks happened to that flight. But that flight has really galvanized the opposition to the Iranian regime in a way that even obviously the killing of Soleimani did not, but it's really shaken a lot of people in Iran. It seems it's really exacerbated and has really made more vocal opposition to the Iranian regime come out in the public eye with protests and all of that. So I think a much more likely scenario is that you're going to see Eric Prince style operatives perhaps on the ground in Iran fomenting the seeds for, just fomenting further conflicts and further divisiveness within the streets of Iran to galvanize and create the possibility for regime change. Then we also have to take into consideration the grand bargain, this deal with all of these Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt as well. This sort of coalition of Arab countries that is aligned in recent years, and this is part of what the researcher Seth Abramson, has laid out in his his most recent book, Proof of Conspiracy, regarding what he calls the Grand Bargain, which involves Israel and Russia and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, among other countries, and all basically working together in a coordinated effort to ensure the victory of Donald Trump in 2016, and then really shaping the geopolitical agenda in the aftermath of that. And that one of the things that's been proposed is an alliance against Iran. So we could see these countries come together with a figure like Eric Prince playing a key role in helping to foment this, along with other operatives as well. But Prince is just so involved in so many different places and in so many different aspects of things that I could very well see Blackwater Eric Prince style private militias, along with perhaps other operatives from within some of these other countries that have joined in this alliance against Iran, to foment chaos, and more or less you're going to see more of a covert efforts, I think, to perhaps rein in this government than an actual military conflict. I said a mouthful there. I hope it made sense.
On that, I can't, and that's what I'm afraid of what it's going to move to, and the CMP definitely would push that. And so, what do you think? What do you think the Democrats are going to do after the Senate trial fails? Do you think anything interesting is really going to come out during the Senate trial of the crimes? Because there's no way the true crimes of Donald Trump can come out, can they, Greg? Because, if the true crimes, Trump's connections to the Russian Jewish oligarchs and the Mountain Jew oligarchs, if that happens, then both sides would be exposed, right? Because, some people say, Russiagate's fake and phony, but you and I both know that it's not true, and that Russiagate encompasses both the Democrats and the Republicans.
It's much bigger than what it's actually not being. It's actually not a hoax, but it's actually very limited in scope in terms of what we're seeing is the official investigation and the media narrative on it. As far as the Democrats and what they're going to do, that's an interesting question. I know you laid out your scenario for what you think the Democrats are going to do with the Clinton-Elizabeth Warren ticket, and I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I could see one of these Democrats trying to perhaps distinguish themselves and saying they're the person who can beat Trump, which is going to be laughable in the aftermath of this, because, outside of Bernie Sanders, none of these people could come, even in a legitimate election, and maybe an outside chance Elizabeth Warren, but outside of Sanders, none of these Democratic candidates could even come close to Trump, even in a genuine, I believe, election at this point, much less a rigged election. So I don't know.
I definitely agree with you on that. I'm always concerned too if I just don't know what's because nothing's gonna happen when it comes to this political theater. Nothing ever does, and so it'll just be more fodder for people to say that there is no Russian collusion or conspiracy on both sides.
As Sebastian Gorka would say, the Russian collusion delusion.
So yeah, I mean, so what do you think? Can you give us a brief rundown of Trump's connections, some of Trump's connections to Russia, for people out there, real quick? Just a brief rundown, just because I want to get it out there, and you and Jeremy cover it so well in the Antedote, more than I can wrap my head around of sometime. I know the players, I know some of the connections, but you guys definitely, that's some of your bread and butter research that you guys have done. Mm-hmm. And I have never finished Craig Unger's book because it's, I don't know, it's difficult read for me. It's not
and
that I have
Unger himself. There's some, Unger himself. He's very much an establishment kind of leftist figure as well. But I would say that for me, where it comes down to with me is the long-term relationship of Donald Trump with this. What you just talked about, this Soviet, what is now kind of extended into a global organized crime syndicate operating out of the former Soviet Union, and it is primarily primarily Jewish, very Zionist in nature. And the long-term aspects of this, I think, go back to the rise, Donald Trump's rise to political, to prominence in terms of the of acquiring of combination of casino properties and real estate properties. And I would also throw out real quick that in addition to the obvious mobbed up aspects of it, there was also it appears that according to Michael Collins Piper in the article he wrote for the now deceased Michael Collins Piper, the article he wrote for American Free Press, I believe, titled "Who Towers Behind Trump." He's written about the Trump's acquisition of Resorts International Empire, which was basically an extension of the elements of the Rockefeller, Bill's CIA through the Mary Carter Paint Company, and also, so there's that aspect with Trump going back to, and a combination of those interests along with the Meyer-Lansky organized crime syndicate. So there's that as well with Trump, in addition to what I'm about to, in addition to this mob aspect as far as the Soviet Russian mafia. But with Trump, I think the long-term questions as far as connections to Russia go back to this organized crime syndicate and the fact that Trump's properties, ever since he really established himself as a major player in the business community, both in New York and nationally, through casinos and through real estate. Obviously, casinos, if you want a business that you can legitimately launder and wash your dirty money through, you'd do it through casinos, and you'd also do it through real estate. So Trump's had probably like billions upon billions of dollars washed and laundered through these business properties of his, and with that comes a lot of compromise. And I think that this is where those connections go. But and then when you consider Russia, when you take into this, Jeremy's pointed out that this is the Russian deep state is a coming together. It's this mafia aspect which is extended out across the globe, but it also connects with the Russian intelligence services, and the idea that the KGB, now the FSB, is just an extension of the Russian government in a lot of ways, in so many ways. So I think you have to take this long-term relationship going on 3 or 4 decades and take the Trump relationships with so many of these mobbed up figures within this bigger organized crime syndicate that someone like Semyon Mogilevich is seen as being at the head of. Obviously, people like Felix Sater and his long-term relationship with Trump. There's also some of the names, unfortunately, are escaping me right now. Jeremy and I have gone through the names in some of our Antedote programs in depth of all of the laundering and washing of legitimate money. That's basically Craig Unger's take on it, is that his properties have been used as a front for all of this for 4 decades. And I think the evidence of this is pretty strong. And one more person I will throw in here as it relates to the bigger Russia narrative, as it relates to this organized crime syndicate, is the primary role of Rudy Giuliani as being the person on the ground in Ukraine. And Giuliani's rise to political, his rise, what he made his name off of before he became the mayor of New York, before he became America's mayor, he was the prosecutor in southern New York. And his claim to fame was basically cracking down on the Italian Gambino crime family, people like John Gotti, and basically replacing them with the Soviet mob immigrants who came into New York in vast numbers in the last years of the Cold War and then in the immediate years after the end of the Cold War. So that is where I think the connections to Trump and Russia really come into play. And people just want to make it out like, Putin just owns Trump in like this generic, this very sensationalized, like it's a Bond movie, like it's a movie, like a spot, it's like just straight out of the Cold War that Putin owns Trump and the Russians are just trying to destroy America, like in a very just cartoonish weapon villain kind of way. But I think the truth about it is much.
Well, they're doing it. They're doing it through seeing a propaganda. I mean, look at Alexander Dugin. And trying. I mean, I would say Russia does have a lot of demonizing the West, and people fooling them and making them uphold Russia as some paragon of truth in the world and paragon of how civilization should be, why denigrating the United States. I do think that is a valid criticism that many people have. against Russia, because you have a lot of the Russophiles, whether it's Jay Dyer, whether it's Alex Jones, whether it's Jeff Rentz,
Hmm.
that have CMP leanings or CMP ties, that seem to favor Vladimir Putin and the teachings of Alexander Dugin, which is the modern day
And
Rasputin.
to a lesser extent, to some of those people you mentioned, I would also throw in there, and he's not as overt about it because I don't think he can be on Fox News. But Tucker Carlson fits into this milieu. He's much less overt about it, but certainly Tucker, I would say, fits into that description as well not in as direct and as overt way, but I certainly think it's there. And then there's also similar influence operations being run on the left side of the spectrum as well, with in similar style propaganda that's just more directed at a leftist audience, but it comes out the same way. Whereas like Russia is the bulwark of like resistance to the U.S. empire and to U.S. imperialism, as it's called on the left, and that countries who are being demonized and vilified and oppressed by the American empire are turning to Russia and also turning to China because they see them as the alternatives, and that the the counterbalance to the Americans. So there's influence operations being run on the right and on the left, and much like with the generic, just much with the general narrative of Trump and Russia, and missing the point that Trump is basically a long-term, I believe, compromised agent of very powerful individual, very powerful organized crime, mobbed up figures. That you also media also misses the point in sensationalizing the idea of Russian bots and Russian troll farms, but it's done in a way that it's very hard to take it seriously. Whereas you can point to influence operations, I think, in a much more direct and I think a much more credible way. That these things are going on, but they're not presented in a manner that really is. It's hard. It's presented in a manner that's hard to take it seriously if you just listen to like the media narrative.
Yeah, S90 in the chat wanted me to ask you something I was actually going to talk about with, we know Paul Manafort's
Hmm.
possible multiple time influence in the Ukrainian elections. What do you think about Ukraine as being a battleground between, like, La Cirkel and the Bilderberg group of the left or right sides of the world order? What do you think of them, Ukraine kind of as a tug of war between the Western and Eastern forces? As being a battleground in the past decade or two. What do you think about that?
That's a good question. It's to me, Jeremy and I, we've laid out our theories about what we even called, much less even with like that on the surface, even though I think at the highest levels a lot of people come together and make decisions
Of
as
course.
far as like or on the same level, there are, I believe, very real differences as far as like the agendas and the policy that's being pushed by the Trump administration that is going in a very, at least on the surface, radically different direction than what we know is like the U.S. Foreign policy consensus that the idea for like the liberal New World Order that, say, George H.W. Bush spoke fondly of, the idea of like of a strong United Nations and a strong united Europe, and obviously the United States at the center of it, of this world order, through the facade of phony democracy and phony freedom, because it doesn't result in any of that for people. But even the idea of that, I think there is a real split at some level between the forces of Trump and that are very much making this that are making this pseudo right wing nationalist populism a reality globally. And so I do see something like Ukraine possibly as being at the epicenter of something like this. And Ukraine is clearly a ground for a lot of very shady, to say the least, activity going on on multiple sides of the political spectrum, as far as the types of people that we know of here in the U.S., not just obviously Manafort, but also people like the Podestas and their
Yeah.
involvement in Ukraine. And so I would say that as far as Ukraine being like a contentious ground where there is competition going on, I could definitely see that. But I was saying, though, not only have we talked about even the Trump in the split as far as like the pushback at some level as far as like within like the neoliberal foreign policy establishment, but even a neocon split. And I think part of this is that we've identified what we've called paleo neocons and then like the neo neocons, and you have the paleo neocons would be like William Crystal types
Yeah.
who are very pro-Israel, they're very pro-Zionist, but they see a world where it's the U.S. it's U.S. global hegemony through the might of the U.S. military machine, and they believe very strongly in the quote-unquote democratic institutions. Robert Kagan falls into this category, and that I think explains a big part of what explains these people's never Trump stances, and they see even like the overt hardline policies being pushed by the Trump administration and some of their allies like Putin and yes, even Netanyahu as a threat. And so I see Ukraine as an epicenter of this, where it seems to be, if we're to take it at face value, there is a war or a conflict between the forces of the forces of Trump and this global movement that's behind Trump, and then also the forces with Russia playing a very key role in terms of influencing the operations going on in Ukraine, and then those forces of the democratic world who want to see Russia as part of a strong West and see Ukraine as a battleground to bring Russia into this fold, basically being, I think, in some ways you might call it subservient even to the West, whereas you also have this contingent that very much relies upon seeing a vested interest in seeing like the liberal European order being disrupted and destroyed, and Ukraine, I think, fits into this from a perspective of, well, I hope I'm making sense here.
No, you are. La Circle, which is the higher up in the right, they want Europe to break apart. Where
Yeah,
the
I need to
Bilderberg
educate myself on La Circle.
where the Bilderberg group would want the European Union to stay together.
Yeah.
I myself, being more of a nationalist, think that it would be better if the countries had individual freedom, but that's a policy discussion.
Yeah. But there's also the fact that it's a very weaponized narrative going
Yes.
on. What I think is coming out of things like Brexit and the rise of parties like Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, or what we're seeing in someone like Viktor Orban in Hungary, is not going to result in the type of freedom and actual
not at all.
sovereignty for people. I mean, because Brexit seems to be another mobster operation, much like the Trump operation. But going back to Ukraine, I do think Ukraine could be seen as a battleground between these varying forces. As this person who asked the question laid out, and I appreciate the question. It's a good question, and I hope I was able to answer it in a way that makes sense. I do see it as a battleground, so to speak. I mean, you could see it that way, and between the forces of democracy, Western style democracy, and then the people and there is a vested interest among people who are in a pro-Russian milieu, as well as within a very Zionist, pro-Israel centric milieu, who see democratic institutions and who even see like the milquetoast generic opposition to certain policies of the Israeli government that like EU countries will throw out as being a bridge too far for them, even though they're not really doing anything to rein in Israel, so to speak. And so, yeah, I see Ukraine as a battleground between multiple forces. You could see it that way, and that is just one of the major battlegrounds, so to speak, of these varying forces that are competing for influence and power. Although at the end of the day, I don't know how much of it is real and how much of it is staged, but I do get the impression there are very real policy differences at certain levels.
Yeah, okay, so I know it's getting late, Greg. One more question. I definitely want to have you back on. This has been an excellent discussion, brother. And can you briefly go over George Nader? I know a lot of MAGA hat wearing people and disciples of Q only want to push that Nader was funding the Clinton campaign. Who was the guy? Who was the guy that he was funding the Clinton campaign from back in 2016? Nader was. Do you remember?
Are we talking about? You mean the Trump campaign?
No, they funded the Clinton campaign too. There's a certain guy that gave a political donation. All right, when I'm looking it up, can you briefly go over Ahmad Khawaja?
Okay.
He
Yeah,
funded millions.
I'm not familiar with the Nader Clinton connections, other than a lot of Trump people were running with allegedly George Nader in a hot tub, I believe, with Bill Clinton.
Yeah, but that wasn't Nader. That wasn't him. That was a
Okay.
different Nader. But so okay, so this is what they always run with is that he tried to co-opt the Clinton campaign first. Nader did, and he did. He funneled more than 3.5 million dollars to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign through Ahmad Khawaja. I mean, that's proven. I mean, there's not like that's
Hmm.
But they say since that didn't work out, Hillary Clinton didn't get elected. He moved on to Donald Trump. What would you have to say to prove that Nader's been in bed with the Counts for National Policy types like Eric Prince since beforehand,
Yeah.
and that it was just yeah, he may have. It might have just been them funding both sides. Is my way of looking at it. But what would you say? Can you briefly go over Nader
Well,
real quick?
Nader was hired by Eric Prince to, help Blackwater get contracts with the, with the Iraqi government that came about in the aftermath of Saddam Hussein being removed from power. So there's one aspect, and then you had Nader taking part in meetings with Donald Trump Jr., offering assistance to Trump, and then um, Nader basically represented Saudi Arabia and also the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, as well as Mohammed bin Zayed um, of the United Arab Emirates, basically representing them de facto, representing them in meetings with Eric Prince, as well as Joel Zamel, who was the head of the owner of the Israeli intelligence firm Psy Group, and then you have Nader. So Nader's right there, directly involved in the involved with multiple countries, acting as a de facto lobbyist for multiple countries that had a vested interest in seeing Donald Trump become president as part of a bigger geopolitical game going on. And then even after Trump was elected, Nader was taking part in meetings with UAE officials and people like Jared Kushner and Michael Flynn. And then he was also part of the the meeting we hear about a lot with
Yes.
Eric Prince and, among others, Kirill Dmitriev, who's the head of the state-run Russian Direct Investment Fund in the Seychelles Islands in January 2017. And we still don't know the real details of that meeting, but George Nader was present for that, and then George Nader also worked with LBRY, who was a primary Republican fundraiser during the Trump campaign as well. So the connections are there. I mean, this idea that we're just going to make George Nader out to just be once again, it's like it's even more overt. It's even more obvious than Epstein Trump. I mean, if you're just going to try to make Nader just out just doing dirty things because what becomes uncomfortable with that George Nader for like Trump people to deal with is the fact that George Nader has been charged on more than one occasion for having being result of issues related to having abuse of underage boys and having on him on pornography related to
Yeah, it was
you
like
know
multiple cases, right?
yes
1985
multiple cases.
charge,
There's
one
a
done in the early
19
'90s, if I remember.
1991 charge, and then
Yeah,
there was a 2003 charge as well, and then he was just arrested in 2019 for possession of child pornography. And the most recent arrest was when like InfoWars style media outlets just went out trying to portray this as just another deep state
yeah. So
Clinton.
if that's true, then why did it happen so much beforehand that
Yeah.
prosecutors agreed in the 1991 case in federal court to put the case under seal because of the sensitive nature of Nader's work, even back then. Did you guys ever? I can't remember when you guys did an excellent show on Nader. Did you guys talk about how he worked with the George H.W. Bush administration to free the
Um,
American hostages in Lebanon,
I can't remember for sure if we discussed that,
and
but
him working with Estee Lauder?
we probably did. It may have come up in one of our conversations. Yeah, he helped to free hostages in Lebanon, and then he worked with Ronald Lauder, who's
Oh yeah,
the
that's right.
son of
It was
S.A. Lauder.
yeah, I was right. It was Ronald
And
Lauder. That's right.
attempts to broker a quote peace agreement between Israel and Syria. And if you want to go back to Trump and the Russian, the global organized crime, I mean, Ronald Lauder is another interesting figure, and even Ronald Lauder pops up when it comes to September 11th, as Ronald Lauder was a player within the New York Port Authority, which transferred control of the World Trade Center towers to Larry Silverstein. So,
Yeah, I still find it how it's interesting how Nader was questioned during Robert Mueller's investigation about his suspicions and connections to UAE in Trump's 2016 campaign, but he was charged in December 2019 over violating the campaign finance laws, which was the donation of $3.5 million to Hillary Clinton during the 2016 presidency. So nothing's really happened as far as connections with Trump, but his connections with Hillary Clinton is what he was convicted on. So it seems to be something they seem to be hiding more as far as the deep state is concerned with his connections to Trump, to the United Arab Emirates.
I think it's connections to this bigger, this bigger global agenda that's going on with relation to Trump, in relation to this bigger geopolitical benefits that various countries, various interests get out of seeing, particularly a Republican, or obviously a Republican of the Trump milieu, being elected, and obviously Nader acting as a de facto representative of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia in these meetings with top Trump campaign officials, and Eric Prince and Joel Zamel, and lead up to the election, as a part of an extension of the psychological warfare style operations that were taking place with Cambridge Analytica and the SCL group. I mean, there is still a cover up there, and while there's people who are very much wringing their hands about Trump and in the remaking of the globe under Trump and how Trump is destroying American credibility globally, there's still an unwillingness, just like with so many other things, to actually really truthfully address these issues within just the media sphere, so to speak.
Yeah, very much so, Greg. Is there anything else that you want to discuss real quick, brother? Or definitely tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I hope I haven't, and I hope my explanations for things have made sense. There were some names that were escaping me there in the process of discussing the Trump-Russia connections. And
hey, you can't keep all those names up in your head, man. Lord knows I can't.
But no, it's been a great conversation. I appreciate coming on and chatting with you, and I'd love to do this again. I look forward to doing it again very soon. But people can find the Antedote on YouTube. You can just go to youtube.com/the Antedote, or you can just type in Antedote. That's ANTEDOTE on YouTube, and you can find links to our shows. And we keep our shows archived on there. And we even had some shows that were taken down not too long ago that we have reposted. We need to start branching out into other platforms as far as getting our shows out to all the major. But we've been, we've been slacking on that. We have a Patreon page as well. If people want to consider supporting us or even checking out our shows on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/the Antedote, and we have our page up there as well. But for right now, it's you can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Patreon, and we also have our show broadcasted on No Lies Radio at noliesradio.org. Our weekly 58-minute shows are carried on there. Those are the primary places you can find us. Jeremy and I have Twitters. We're not nearly as active on there as we should be.
No, y'all never are. Y'all never are.
We do a lot to step up our game, but right now you can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Patreon, and please check out our work, and we appreciate any support we get. So
yeah, definitely. I'll put links to both your YouTube, to your Patreon. I want to thank all the work that both you and Jeremy are doing, the activism that you guys are doing, confronting the people that are supposedly supposed to represent us, and asking them the tough questions. Greg and both you and Jeremy both doing that, and also with you guys putting your research out there, and your weekly commentary that you guys are doing with the Antedote. I want to thank y'all both for doing that. It's very important, and I'll definitely have you on again soon. Take care. All right, that's it. that's it for this evening. I loved having Greg on. Greg and I remember the first time I listened to him, I was just blown away. He knows a lot. Both him and Jeremy, they're doing great work of trying to get the truth out there about the deep state and what is really going on around the world. And we'll definitely, hopefully, have Greg on again in the future for sure. Till next time, as always, continue.